Rachmaninoff, oh, so contemplative, so emotional, so elegantly sophisticated in its pianism, but in order to express such a deep and powerful, almost as if self-addressed for each of us individually, musical message. It's not a message with a statement. It's not a fugue with an experiment of intellectual development of the thought process of musical motivic elements. It's really not. It is so rich in polyphonic contrapunctal element in the pianism, but all that adorning the melodic line, the singing. Thank God he wrote for us what he did for himself, naturally, in the first place, being the pianist he was, but somehow appropriated by all of us and individually meaning for us. When I teach him, I feel like I'm so honored to teach his music, the timelessness of his incredible inspiration, and the pianism of his that uses the elements of course, his culture. You can think as you like, but I think that not all composers reflect their personality in music that they create. Would be sometimes the opposite. I've known some composers personally, like Jean Francais, Henri Dutilleux, who really were their music in their being, or the music was their being. And in some cases, like in Rachmaninoff, it seems to me clear that it's above and beyond their personality. They are called to translate through them something bigger than them, something higher than them, something so earnest and so idealized and so incredibly fueling our need as humans for our thirst for absoluteness, for uncompromised emotional connection, a hug, an emotional squeeze of the heart in the terms of course, the siege of the soul, and not just the pump. But obviously we symbolize everything, and why not in that sense also him translating through his notes of music that Russian capacity of expression through their language to profoundly exhale when they speak. О, Боже мой, скажи меня, мой друг, душа моя. Musically you hear ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta-ta, this dropping, this exhaling. It's almost always as if there is not a lament per se, but a sense of having taken breath, held it, hoped, and then as the end of the seasons comes, just let go. And I find that when you look at the inner landscapes that are suggested in his music, oh my God, it's difficult as a teacher for me personally not to overstate all the elements that are constructive in his texture of these emanations of emotional connection. Perhaps it's too much. Perhaps I read too much in the intentions of translating this "мой друг," my other friend in Russian, for the word other, or "душа моя," my soul, soul mine, when they address to each other at intimate human level, of the expression of the music as a prolongation of the human, I would say, longing for humanity, longing and thirsty, even if in the middle of an observation of nature and being in a way of ecstatic, but of course, is very active in the 2-against-3 rhythmically, the secondary voices that become more attractive than the original melodic line which they're adorning. I mean, how to not get distracted by all these elements of elegant and heartfelt, meaningful beauty. It's like you say a statement while it's so incredibly emotionally beautiful. And in a way, you can say, okay, as a performer, he was reserved. His music is out of his own hands, dies emotionally for intensity, for intimacy, for action, passion, in the sense of connecting to the sorrow or the hope of humanity through each one of us, that it touches us musically as if individually, meaning something probably different, but essentially this contemplative element combined with this element of call it nostalgia, call it, of course, in a time period where he was alive, he was missing his Russia that became Soviet Union. So he was a lost soul searching through music, perhaps, to reconnect to his roots through the language sounds translated into music sounds. Or is it that I see too much into it? Perhaps. I plead guilty as charged. I am convinced, converted believer in his humanism, musically speaking. And I'm convinced that his music is bigger than him, and God knows he was a giant, pianistically speaking, musically speaking. But he left us something that is beyond him, that is for all of us. It's like a universal gift of humanity. And I think that it's nothing wrong to suggest to the student the different ways to express all these. In fact, there isn't a single way. And it seems to evolve every time. It's almost like at the different hours of the day, the different shadows, the different light, the pieces reveal themselves in a way that they talk to us at sunset, at dusk, symbolically at different seasons of our lives. Perhaps it's because he was a pianist that he managed, and with his very long fingers, he managed to superimpose so many elements that we have to not hierarchize in interpretation, because that would be reductive. We have to just display them and let the mix happen. It's like almost as if you trust the piece to bring you and transport you, and in this acoustic, on that piano, with this audience, and this kind of listening, emotional, captured instant, ephemeral moment of eternity, unforgettable perfume, a gaze, a rose, a garden, a hope, an absolute necessity of thirst for beauty, for meaning in the beauty. And I think that what I love about the expression of his musical compositional thought is that, like an undying sentence would be his rhetoric. In a way, his rhetoric is a run-on sentence that keeps on giving. And the more you dig into it as a pianist, the more you breathe the elements, you render elements, you combine elements, or they combine themselves for you. A repeated note in an accompaniment, a dotted rhythm delaying the drop of the melodic line. And then a simple drop of a given interval becomes an exhaling, as if all of your hopes and sorrows go through that intake and exhale of air. I mean, one can describe it in many ways. Everybody is free to describe it their own way. I just did mine. But it's not exhaustive either. It reveals itself differently every time almost you revisit his music. And when you teach his music, you have to remain objective. That's what teachers are supposed to be. We have facts, we have scores, we have notes, we have indications, we have pitches and rhythms and phrasings. and then we add the fingerings, and we want them to be singing. We want to overstay some notes, overload the notes with the emotional content, and then the release, and then the drop, and then the interruption of some pregnant silence, and then the dropping until the result that is almost a release, but it's a release in abandon, rather than having only chased a series of climaxes. It's more about being in expectation. And he uses syncopations, but not like Schumann. He uses downbeat, unlike Tchaikovsky, who also has that sense of immediate connection with the idiom of his musical expression to the human psyche of us, very at intimate, deep levels where it's almost indecent to explain, and perhaps indecent to overstate with rubato, which is not written, but is, I think, elementally embedded. Question is, what is the good and bad taste of how much or not? And I find that the beauty is that every student who discovers his music, it becomes their own. And I try to make sure that the fingerings correspond to their morphology in order to express all these elements of incredible, unfinishing sentence, phrase, as if he doesn't want to leave us. We don't want to leave him, meaning his music, not him personally. Through his music, the soul, the expression of a situation where when we hear or play his music, we feel like, this is where I would like to be. This is how I would like things to be, because this is what is important to me. And this appoggiatura, this accacciatura, this dotted rhythm, this triplet, this 2 against 3 rhythmicity, this eloquent and at the same time abundant rhythmicity allows me to hear the interacting of a beautiful secondary line which overwhelms me and in a way distracts me from the principal thematic line. And should I let myself go for that? Should I betray my melodic line that started because the other one that arrived completely mesmerized me? The seduction, the emotion, the connection, the combination, the overlapping of the different elements, not like contrapoint for the sake of it, or in a way for impressing intellectually, but always to combine different elements of the inner world that we all carry in us when we live our lives. And then we can be never only happy and never only sad. We can be bittersweet, we can be hopeful and fearful, expecting and fearing all together. And his music expresses those different elements with such subtlety. His musical sentence is like a conversation with a heartfelt friend, Dusha Maya, or Druk, my other, as the Russians say. So he could have very well written this not being Russian. Perhaps it would have been a different agogic in his expression of the phrase, of the line, compared to the Russian language, accenting the downbeat wheel, in that case the first syllable of the words. But even if one can attach literature in terms of the sound of poetry of a given language with the music that expresses it when it's associated to it, or then when it's dissociated from the words, then the music suggests it directly to the psyche beyond the very word. But you know what it is about. You know when it's about sorrow, soul, being left alone because somebody dear departed, and it's consoling, and it's hugging, and it's emotionally suspended on an expectation. I mean, aren't we all moved by a poem, by a painting, by a sculpture, by a gesture of a chosen word, of a smell, of an elegant presentation, not only physically, but in the way to behave, and the way of being if not generous because it's not given to all, or be selfless, perhaps in any case for sure we don't want. And I personally find that harder and harder to live, the connection between the author and their work. Regardless if Brahms was impolite or selfish, or perhaps has the flaws and the ways of his human being and perhaps of his societal situation, but he rose above himself to leave us the unbelievable pieces that talk to us way beyond him or her, of course, Lily Boulanger and other female composers as well as male. In fact, I don't even hear gender in music. I don't want to only associate them to their music by their being. Of course, it's touching to know certain aspects of their life, and then we start connecting over it. But in fact, it should be only what the music is. And what music says. It says it so much more fulfillingly, while it hints it so clearly. And sometimes, if it's not clear, and as a teacher you have to explain and organize and say, not too much, a little delay, these two notes cannot play together because they are a climax, even if it's a wounded hero style emotional depiction of a heroism which in the late romantic era, well, after all he died in the 1940s, he remained timeless in the fact that probably by playing all these pieces by Schumann and Chopin as a concert pianist, he felt like being in the Tchaikovsky, I would say, vein, in the Tchaikovsky land. In the Rachmaninoff land, I think, is adjacent to the Tchaikovsky land. Put all together, you can say this influence, that influence, fine. But ultimately, the mix is his. Like all of the composers whom we admire, or who, if we don't admire, love. And if we don't love, misunderstand. And if you don't understand, then we try again. And at some point it happens. And I think that it's not the kind of music you play because you have to. It's the music you play because you cannot not. At some point, you might find it too much this, not enough that, like for everything. And physical elements also, because he wrote for himself, a lot of the displays are very large. And so some people feel frustrated they can't play, but it's possible. Arpeggiate, delay, organize, how to put them together in terms of the two hands. But it's not even two hands. It's just three hands. It's like four hands. It's amazing because the texture, when you read his score, seems very politely organized groups of bars of 3/4. And when you hear the music, it just blossoms over all bar lines, all expectations of organized musicianship. It seems to be the perfect notation that translates when you play a certain improvisatory quality. Regardless, even if you don't do rubato, and sometimes you cannot not, because somehow you have this expectation with this delay and then this melody and then this secondary melody that overtakes the first and the syncopations in the middle, and you feel like the harmonic combinations are moving, they're emotional, they are not just harmonic. It seems like he uses so simply all the tools that other composers used before him, but he plays them in a way that they express something so unadulterated directly to us. And then we try to play it at its fullest, and we realize that it takes a lot of courage to find what it is that will allow us to do it. Is it just fingering, superstitions? Well, I always call that substitutions because my brain doesn't function well. But it is substitutions, I meant, for the finger legato so that the pedal doesn't overwhelm in terms of the harmonic legato over the melodic one. And also the breathing, the real breathing, the quarter note rest, the pregnant rest, an intense rest that is almost like a suspension, musically speaking, in terms of notes, and then the release. that comes in some acceptation, some agreement that, okay, I hoped, I dreamt, I loved, I hugged, I, I transmitted, I vibrated to the emotion of the beauty, to the emotion of the feelings of others, to the emotion that I see in nature that is not meant by such for my emotion, but I attribute to it's what I think it talks to me in symbolic ways. And so why not? If you see like Scriabin colors in the tonalities, or if you could see perhaps tastes, or perhaps you can see another of our senses triggered to receive, to filter all what Rachmaninoff's music written becomes alive when we play it through his own depth of personality. Oh, yes. First, you have to interrupt the silence to start the first chord. G flat major 6/4 with the D flat in the thumb of the right hand if you don't take it in the left before the melody enters 2 bars later on the same D flat. So you want to have a D flat that is whispered in this ascending tetrachord, and then separating the sound, in the color, in the shape, in the timbre with the D flat of the melody. So the dotted rhythms are written dotted 8th, 16th, then the larger dotted quarter 8th, and then again the dotted 8th, 16th. And you have a rhythmic accelerando, while the right hand plays in equal 8th notes, but the chordalization, if I may say, between the major 6/4 second inversion of the triad, the minor 7th passing tone, nevertheless minor 7th, then the 6/4 of B flat minor, the relative minor, and it's also second inversion 6/4 between the two. You have this, and then it evaporates before the rest, and we start in the relatively bright triton, triad with these 3 sounds. Of course, it's not a triton. So you go from major, minor, 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 major. And then you have the middle 2 that repeat. It's almost like they hug, they kiss, and you feel like with the hairpin that is indicated crescendo diminuendo, you feel like doing it a bit rhythmically. And then, oh, it's too much. Perhaps it should be more stable. Perhaps bring more the second chord because it's the first beat we hear. Since we start off beat, but it's the rest we don't know that until. So the left hand starts on an upbeat of a quarter whenever the right hand starts on an upbeat of an 8th note. And the repeated notes of the thirds that have to be repeated, in my opinion, inside the resonance, not reattacked. Ta ha ha. And secondary scale. And then the melody. by 2 bars, it became by 4 bars, and this high F will become in the A prime when he restarts the theme in the left hand bottom. The ascending tetrachord, this time tied with a retardation rather than, and replayed a cacciatura port de voix. And the thirds, instead of repeated like in the opening, they become quarter notes of beat. And then you have a secondary voice which comes and shines on the top as if it's a revelation. That's what I felt in the opening when he does. In the stretch, retract, open, close, intake, exhale. You hear the echo of the sounds before, and you prepare to conclude in the silence of your soul. Of course, he doesn't say that in his music there should be rubato or fermata on the rests. And the beauty is to be able to first sink in the depth of each detail and then rise above and play melodic lines, trying not to overstate. If there is a little wind on the top branches of the tree, that's fine, but it shouldn't sway the tree. But at the same time, it reveals itself differently, because sometimes you feel like you cannot not. And sometimes you go. Sometimes you have to say it, sometimes you have to just give the tender gaze, and you don't have to explain the term of endearment. Then comes the choice of the fingering, or the organization of the 2 against 3. He has the secret of this regret chromatic descent, of course, that comes to mind right away. The chromatic descending pattern in the Barcarolle by Chopin, or the chromatic fantasy by Bach. Chromatic, it's not only suspended, it's syncopated, it's delayed, it's hopeful and disappointed, hopeful and losing hope, and interrupting in the midst of a rising hope. best. One can say way more, and perhaps I said already too much, other than what the music says itself, which is the pure, direct, soulful connection. I can force myself to believe in my interpretation that without rubato it can be as meaningful for what I see in it. And then ask a student, if I feel like they're more reserved, not to spread themselves in too much rubato, because the problem of the rubato is that once you're off the road, off the tracks, how do you return? And if you don't leave them and you express them only within the elements, but without to add on top of it what it means to you, then in a way the music shines pure like a bird soaring in the sky. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it myself. I just rubatoed. Okay, let's be disciplined, Emile. But it's not largo. I think I'm playing it andante. I'll try to play it more largo and more straight. Oh my God, it's terrible. Every time a soulful cadence with a dissonance that is so warm and heartfelt, and I have to respond, but then perhaps I overstate. I can't play it without rubato, I'm sorry. And of course, if I indulge, there's nothing left of integrity. Overwhelms me, the rising, the chromaticism, the rising by semi-steps or the dropping before, and the stagnation in the middle, and the breath and the stop and the start and the combination of minor, major, or with the minor nines. Well, I cannot. What can I say? And then I'm overtaken with this free melody on top. but I don't need to forget that my duty is the melodic line of the symphonic, I was gonna say, because it is very orchestral, but mostly the symbolic gesture of the restatement of the motif. With the secondary voice. Over legato. And then inside. The opening between the two hands, but with syncopations rather than repeated eighth notes. Thanks to Sergei Rachmaninoff, Naoumoff was shut up of speaking because I don't think any word is necessary. But when you teach, you have to put fingerings. You have to reinstall the tempo. You have to think about the layers. You manage it, but you don't explain it. Then you play through until you find the way. You carry the elegance of his phrasing and the way he displays the notes and the harmonies and the melody. And you try to taste each note, each combination of notes. Oh, what a delirium, wasn't that? Oh. Sorry, Sergei, I didn't mean to offend, but I couldn't not indulge to stay longer in your arms, in your soul, in your being. That brings this music as a prolongation of my own soul. I don't know anymore if I play what you wrote, or if I play what I hear of what you wrote, or if I play what I hear that I wrote, because obviously you're a giant and I'm nobody. I'm not unaware of that. But I like to sort of like extend my welcome in your world, in Rachmaninoff land. Intense tenderness. As if this stolen instant ephemerally stays forever, and then we have to let it go. Every time I play each of the harmonies, I feel like he's talking, he's saying, he's speaking, he's humming. The way he connects the harmonies, the way he delays them, the way he expects them, the way he chromaticizes them, the way he sings them, the way he has opposite ways of triplets that go over the emotion and cover the melodic line, and you stay in this intense emotional hug. I just think it's unbelievable that we have been lucky to have him on earth to leave us with that, for the listener, for the player, for both, for all. Thank you. Heartfelt. Thank you.